Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon for our Teaching Innovation Grant seminar. I'm Karen Appleby. So for those of you who I have not met, wonderful to have you here. And for friends and colleagues who I've met and seen lately or haven't seen lately, very good to have you here and excited to spend the afternoon with you. I serve as the director of our Program for Instructional Effectiveness, also known as PI, here on campus. And last year, the PI program got a very exciting opportunity to provide faculty grants to support the development of new and innovative ideas, techniques, and strategies in the classroom. These grants were funded and supported by both the College of Education and the Office of Academic Affairs. And so I would like to take just a minute to first thank Dr. McGivney Burrell, the Dean of the College of Education, and Dr. Mark Neal, the Associate Dean of the College of Education, for their advocacy, support, and funding of this project. And I would also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Provost and Executive Vice President Woodworth Nye for her ongoing commitment, not only to support innovative teaching in the classroom, but her commitment and mission to support faculty development across campus with all of the other events that we have going on in PI. So thank you, Dr. Woodworth Nye, for all you've done for our faculty to support us in the classroom. I would now like to introduce Dr. Margaret Johnson, and Margaret serves as the mentoring coordinator for PI. And Margaret really organized this entire grant process, from all the way from creating the grant applications to organizing the grant decision-making committee to helping with the budget and funding for each of the participants. And so I want to thank Margaret for all of her hard work in doing that last year and helping to make this happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Margaret for just a minute or two, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the Teaching Innovation Grant.
Thank you, Karen, for the introduction and for organizing this event. And thank all of you for joining us today. As the Program for Instructional Effectiveness got off the ground last year, most of our attention was focused on creating workshops and lectures, events that were relevant to large numbers of faculty. But we were also aware that many faculty members had creative ideas for teaching that they weren't able to put into practice due to lack of resources. So we were really excited to be able to fund approximately $36,000 for 8 teaching innovation grants. That was about 40% of the requests that we received. So a lot of people have a lot of great ideas that are still out there. The hard work of reviewing the grants was done by 7 faculty members representing different colleges and universities, the different colleges and the division. And these faculty members met several times during fall 2019, and after careful deliberation made their recommendations to Karen and me. And so I'd like to thank those people specifically. They're Jason Chen, John Curry, Joel Shura, Carolee Esplin, Darren Levitt, Kristen Callie, and Richard Wabreck. They all did great work and demonstrated their commitment to helping their colleagues improve their teaching, and that is a really great gift. So today, we're just really excited to hear about all the work that was accomplished with the help of the Teaching Innovation Grants. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So before we get started, I'll talk to you about sort of the flow and the organization of today's event. So today you'll hear 8 presentations from, as Margaret mentioned, our 10 grant recipients. So we've asked each recipient or recipient group to provide a brief 5-minute-ish, which I know is not very much time to go over so much important information, but 5-minute-ish overview of their project significance, the implementation, and the outcome, whether those outcomes have been realized or what they will be expected. As some of you might anticipate some of these grants were impacted by COVID-19. And so some things changed a little bit last spring, but all of these recipients were still able to move forward with their projects in really successful ways. So after each presentation, we'll have a short period of time, about 3 minutes, for questions and comments from the audience, which I will moderate. So if you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to, of course, just unmute yourself and ask away, or you can post that in the chat and I'll monitor that and I'll ask those questions for you. But of course, if you don't get your questions asked, I'm sure each of the grant recipients would be very happy to field those questions in an email or a conversation after the symposium today. So on to our main event. Our first presenters for the afternoon are David Woods and Connie Miller from the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. David and Connie will be presenting to us today on integrating a treatment technology into the training of clinical students. So I'll turn it over to them.
All right. Our project is, sorry for the echo. Our project was designed to teach graduate students in speech pathology to use the technology in treatment. But little did we know that our video conferencing was going to be the second technology that we were going to teach. On slide 2, the technology that we wanted to bring to our students was a biofeedback technology called the Smart Palette. It shows live images on screen of tongue to palate contact for clinicians and clients to see. And we're going to show a little clip here on choosing tongue targets. That was part of our training. Sorry for the echo that's in there.
You can choose more than one by doing a click in the box. So here's 3. Now that I've chosen those, you can also put some new, which is going to be one of your assignments, is to put a new couple of targets for your client. Now when we go back to Practice tab, still the gold standard play button is not working, so it means we need to select one of these. And that's the one we're going for. So now you see the lighting up of targets for R, the default R.
So that's just a short little sample of what the Smart Palette looks like on screen. Our plan right here was to give the students firsthand learning with this intervention tool and bring it to our clinic using a lot of different modalities. So a lot of hands-on, more than you would have in a typical classroom. Connie, you're muted.
Thank you. I practiced the technology. I missed the mute part. Okay, so I will go over the plan that we have in place. Part of it is still pending due to COVID, and part of it we've been able to accomplish. So our plan was in 3 phases. The first phase involved traditional direct instruction. We did it following a flip classroom format, and we had the students watch a video training about the Smart Palette, and we had them do a reading assignment. And then we did a short 30-minute lab where we showed the video clip of what you just saw was Dave recording using our actual technology that we were able to purchase through the grants there in the building. And we walked through it with the students, and then we walked through the learning portion of the assignment and the things that they were going to be asked to complete. And then phase 2 is in progress. We got our first palette delivered to the clinic this week. So we're super excited to start putting this into action. We aren't able to use live clients because of COVID, but We have simulated clients. So we have 3 students that volunteered to be simulated clients, and they get to keep the palette that was made for them as volunteering. So it's a benefit. We created an activity outline that each of the students that are serving as clinicians will follow, and they'll be able to practice using all 3 of the tabs. And then the students that are serving as the clients will simulate different speech sound disorders, so the students can actually practice. This follows the role play model in the format of near real life, so it was as close to real life as we could get. They will record their 20 to 30 minute simulated clinical session, and then it will be uploaded to Moodle Workshop. And they'll get an opportunity to do feedback. Each one of them will watch someone else's presentation and be able to do feedback, provide feedback. So as you can see from this slide, we were able to hit a whole host of modalities, or will be when they finish this. And then the 3rd section of our phase is after they've completed and watched one of the students in feedback, then they will complete a reflective assignment on their teaching. So doing self-reflection and also the things they learned from watching their peers. So peer reflection, and then we're asking them to project ahead about how they'll be able to use this learning and being exposed to this technology in their further training on placement sites and also in their work as SLPs. We feel like this last piece will give them a perspective of being in the clinic, but then we're having the students who were clients respond on their experiences as a client, which gives another piece of this experience, being able to get connections to how clients feel and being on a more interpersonal level that in that direction.
So just a couple modifications we put on here that I'm sure everyone knows what COVID has done. And then our outcomes are not quite done, but the students are going to benefit, the clinic benefits, and future clients benefit. And we'll wrap it right there.
Thank you both very much. So questions for Dave and Connie?
Dave, this is Laura. I was wondering how students have responded to this tool.
Well, so we're getting the first, some are really excited. Some, maybe they don't know what they're getting into quite yet, but the feedback, once they get their hands on it, it's like when you learn Zoom, I think. Once you've learned a few tricks, you feel accomplished. I don't expect all of them will use it in the future, but I think interacting with peers as simulated clients is going to be an easier way to learn, a little bit less pressure, less stressful.
And I'll just jump in on that one as well. We have some undergraduate students that came from universities that have been using this tool in telepractice before the wave of being pushed into telepractice, and they have been excited about the opportunity to practice it here on our campus. And I feel really grateful for this committee and for the opportunity we had to be able to get this grant, because with the grant and the matching funds from our department, we were able to buy pallets that will allow us. So in 3 years, we were able to use the money to buy the system, and in 3 years, we'll own it outright. And then we have pallets that will continue to keep this system moving in our clinic. So not only benefiting the students, like Dave said, but we'll be benefiting the clients, because there's so many clients with what's called resistant R or S that they can't modulate. But when you get this biofeedback, it will be able to help them. And then students don't feel as frustrated because they have another tool to help clients when they just can't do it through the traditional methods.
Well, thank you both very much. It's fascinating. And one of the things that I am just thinking about is what a neat opportunity for students to put themselves in the shoes of a patient and reflect in that way. And what a neat tool to do that. And how I'm very happy to hear that the funding that you got from the grant will help the department sustain the ability to keep this going. So thank you both very much. If we want to give Dave and Connie a round of applause, virtual or however we want to do it.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Logan Lamprecht from the Department of Counseling. And Logan will be presenting on building cohesive and experimental distance learning communities through technology enhanced classroom environments. So Logan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm assuming you can hear me now. Yeah, I just wanted to name it. It was a pleasant surprise to see a face that I recognized from over 2 decades ago when I took I believe it was a contemporary literature class from Dr. Johnson. So I've been away for a couple of decades out east, so it's nice to see your face again. So yeah, so this teaching grant was the result of being asked to teach a particular course last fall that at the last minute we had to involve the Pocatello campus. I teach over on the Meridian campus in the counseling department. And that was the first time I had ever actually taught in a distance learning capacity. So there was kind of some abruptness to me learning how to engage pedagogically in an environment like that. And I learned pretty quickly that we needed some resources in order to, at least for me and my own pedagogical philosophy, that really kind of privileges student learning in the context of social construction, in that knowledge is learned through dialogue and through interaction. It's not, certainly it's not just learned through a banking educational model where as the teacher I decide what's important and ask students to introject that. So I had to be kind of creative about technology that could support experiential learning across campuses, both the Pokie campus and the Meridian campus. A few weeks into the class, I was under the impression that they had the same technology that we had over in Meridian as it relates to large screens. Whereas in Meridian, we could see students really well, but in Pocatello, they could not see us, except just as dots. So when I visited the Pocatello campus to teach over on that side a couple of different times, it was really apparent to me that that was creating, I think, a lot of challenge for cohesiveness across both learning communities. So I learned, for me, I was motivated when I saw this grant to learn more about what research is saying about distance learning and what helps classrooms become more cohesive so that experiential learning models could be better supported. So this teaching grant really focused on creating 2 learning laboratories that mirrored one another as it relates to technology or technological enhancements. And that primarily consisted of 2 large LED monitors. These are 65-inch monitors. I'll move on my slides here. 65-inch monitors so that students could actually see and make out the faces of other students as they're talking and interacting in class, which can help with a lot of things, at the very least, just remembering names and getting sort of a felt sense of one another, since these students don't have opportunities to spend time together in a physical setting. The other piece of this was getting a laptop, a larger laptop that could be built into both classrooms. At that time, I was doing Zoom meetings because a portion of the course looked at small group experiential discussion. And I wanted to do my best to make hybrid groups where I had students from both the Pocatello campus interacting in small groups from students on the Meridian campus. And we ended up wasting a lot of time trying to get students to log on to their computers and get into Zoom and get email invites. And it was really, the spirit of the project made a lot of sense, but we ended up losing a lot of meaningful and important classroom time as a result of that. So with the result of these laptops that have been like securely installed into both of the classrooms, now we can just, with assistance from a doctoral student or myself on my side, get those ready to go so that students have opportunities to engage in a hybrid small group format across campuses, and build learning in that way, as opposed to just working in their own insulated groups on their particular campus. So this technology the grant fortunately was approved, and the technology was purchased and installed on both campuses. And so now we have 2 learning laboratories that mirror one another that can support cross-campus learning in a number of ways. And I've included some of these pieces here in these bullet points. Again, it can support more cohesive learning environments, can really support students in engaging meaningfully across campuses, in being able to dialogue about material in the classroom, readings and assignments. And it can also just really support the intimacy in the room, because people can see one another more clearly and remember one another in that way. And especially the courses that I teach in the counseling department that are more experiential or skills-based is a big help. A number of our courses are taught across campuses, so this will be a great support both to our master's program and our doctoral program. As a result of COVID, we haven't been able to fully maximize this, because we have most of our students that have chose to learn from their own home environments. So a lot of our students aren't in these classrooms, with the exception of a few of our doctoral level courses where many of those students have already been able to use this technology in the classroom. So that's the essence of the grant, my presentation, and certainly my excitement about how this will support a number of students as they move through the counseling department and learn across campuses.
Thank you, Logan. Questions or comments for Logan?
This is Barb Gordon Logan. Hey, I had a question in terms of like one of the classes I teach is role play, and I'm in Meridian and everyone else is in Pocatello. So did you find when you talk about being able to see each other, like in terms of role play, that you were able to get in there as an instructor and really pick up the nuances of like nonverbal communication and things like that?
Yeah, this is a picture of the room in Pocatello that you're seeing on the computer, and we had a room with monitors that are large like this in Meridian. So when I was in Pocatello, it was easy for me to kind of see some of the challenges not having a screen like this. But when I was watching students role play various skills over on the Pocatello campus and seeing it over on these large screens in Meridian, it was certainly very easy to be able to involve myself and to pick up on a lot of the nonverbal and paraverbal communications that may have been more challenging, I think, if I were viewing that on a small screen. And certainly that helps students too, because then they can participate more fully in the feedback processes. And this is a room, Barb, that's again available to faculty across campuses. That was something that I wrote into the grant so that it wasn't exclusive.
Okay. What building is it in Pocatello?
This particular room is 726 in Garrison Hall. And then there's a room that looks just like this over in Meridian in 685.
Ah, okay, great.
Well, thank you, Logan. And yes, a wonderful opportunity that you built in for faculty from different departments to potentially use this. And what forward thinking too, even though many students aren't on campus, I have a feeling when we start coming back to campus more with COVID, some of this is going to be very, very helpful. So thank you for doing that.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, up next is Vanessa Ballum, and actually Vanessa unfortunately, she's not able to be with us today. So she has shared a video with us, and her video is a little bit longer than the 5 to 7 minutes because she's not here for question and answer, but she has her email at the end of the video, and has extended, of course, the opportunity if you would like to email her and talk with her or comment on anything that she did in her in her grant. So I'm going to pull up Vanessa's, let's see if I can find Vanessa's video, which is right here. So is everybody able to see that? Great.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Ballum. I'm the head of the acting program in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I'm excited to talk to you about my teaching innovation grant. I'm going to go ahead and pull up this slideshow to share with you. So my grant focused on simulation training, which is a brand new idea for me. To give you a little background, I get requests often from different departments on campus asking if I can provide actors for specific simulations. And I always try to facilitate. I always say yes, because I want to be supportive, but there's always been this sort of little nagging feeling in the back of my mind going, I'm not an expert in simulation. A couple of years ago, I attended a seminar at the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival focused on simulation and why it's important and how it can serve universities and training programs. I also had some students attend the student version of that, and they were very jazzed about it. So we came back to ISU and spoke to my colleague, Tara Young, who has actually been involved in a number of emergency scenario simulations where she's brought theater students from our department. For many years, she's done that. So it was nice to compare notes with her. A couple months later, I went to the Teaching Innovation Grant Symposium to support Tara Young, the same colleague, because she was presenting on her grant. And in that symposium, I learned that there were healthcare professionals here on our campus that had already been working in simulation and had received a Teaching Innovation Grant. So as soon as the presentation ended, I went and introduced myself, and the rest is somewhat history. So let's talk a little bit about what a standardized patient is in simulation. A standardized patient encounter is a real person simulation that provides health professionals and students with a dynamic patient care encounter to practice new skills or demonstrate clinical competence. An SP is an individual who has been trained to consistently, in a standardized fashion, portray a particular condition, injury, or illness for teaching and evaluation.
Uh-oh. Vanessa is taking a dramatic pause here. Or perhaps my computer is. Let me work on this for just a second.
And the rest is somewhat history. So let's talk a little bit about what a standardized patient is in simulation. A standardized patient encounter is a real person simulation that provides health professionals and students with a dynamic patient care encounter to practice new skills or demonstrate clinical competence. An SP is an individual who has been trained to consistently, in a standardized fashion, portray a particular condition, injury, or illness for teaching and evaluation purposes. It's been suggested that the use of standardized patients can evoke emotion from the trainee, which can significantly enhance learning by producing memories that are processed and stored. The primary benefit of an SP encounter is that it maximizes patient safety by removing the actual patient while still providing a non-threatening environment for training and assessment. And these types of encounters are important for a variety of training programs at ISU. I usually get about 4 to 5 requests each year, unsolicited. People reach out to me. So we wanted to prepare theater students to portray patients for simulations, and doing that could potentially eliminate identified barriers and increase the use of SP specifically drawn from our student population. So using ISU students to help other ISU students and facilitating the improvement of both of their training programs, which is very exciting. Interprofessional education, or IPE, is common in healthcare and is a standard for accreditation for most healthcare programs. The IPE that is usually encountered is within that healthcare scope. This is innovative because it's taking two professions that are not in the same department or college and giving both sets of students the opportunity to improve skills and knowledge, I would add, by working together. In a simulation, for example, the theater student learns about the specific condition and is able to act as a patient that really has that condition within the simulation. And the healthcare student will have to diagnose and treat the student as a real patient and provide that care in that real time of the simulation. Okay, so in my proposal, I offered the idea of bringing out this fabulous consulting firm, Trajectory Consulting and Simulation, and bringing Daniel Haley and Dr. Julie Carey to Idaho State University to work directly with our students. And before I submitted this application for the Teaching Innovation Grant, I reached out to Danny Moffett from Athletic Training and Melody Weaver from Nursing, because both of them contacted me last fall to say, hey, can we collaborate on some simulations? And I said, well, hey, I'm submitting for this grant, and why don't you come and learn with me? They're from the University of Washington, Daniel Haley and Dr. Julie Carey. So some of the value that I saw in this opportunity was that idea of interdisciplinary opportunities and training. As I already mentioned, the interprofessional education that can exist within a simulation, helping to give even more viability to a theater degree. Often those of us in the arts get some pushback asking, you know, what are you going to do with that training? What are you going to do with that degree upon graduation? Well, here's another way to take their theater training, right, enhance it, and get their foot in the door when they graduate, move to a big city, and they could work as a standardized patient during the day, you know, in the healthcare professions, and then hopefully rehearse and perform in major theater companies in the evenings. So that also helps with that resume builder. This training that the students participated in, they were able to put that on their resume. And if they do simulations while they're a student here at ISU, they can also put that experience on their resume. So in addition to the acting training and the practical application that we do in the shows we produce, here's a whole other way of viewing that, of looking at that. And then also this big thing for Vanessa Ballum, which was teaching teachers, helping to educate me so that I can better facilitate these students in their preparation for simulation to be standardized patients so that they can execute on a really high level. So the pandemic hit. This was supposed to happen in April, and then in March, everything shut down. So we had the opportunity to pivot, and I wanted to thank Karen and Margaret for being so supportive of me in that pivot. So what it translated into, since we were no longer having these two professionals come to our campus and stay in hotels, right? So no flights, no hotels, it translated into more training, which I don't know what could be better for a teaching innovation grant. We ended up with more than twice the amount of training we would have had we been doing it in person. So we moved everything virtual. Everything became housed via Zoom when we were all just starting to get good at using Zoom. And here's what it translated into. So we were able to have an hour and a half devoted to training faculty and administration, or basically what is simulation, right? An introduction to simulation for anyone on campus. We opened this as a free seminar via Zoom. And even though it happened in May, we had a pretty good turnout. I'll show you a picture in just a moment, in the hopes that it might spark some ideas for future opportunities for any department on campus, and to get some buy-in from administration as well. It also allowed us to have 2.5 hours with key stakeholders. So myself, Danny Moffett, and Melody Weaver, where we did our pre-planning of what our goals were. And then also after the whole training series, having a debrief and talking about, all right, what do we do now? And then it translated into 8 hours of training with the theater students, which is really incredible. Initially, it was going to be around 4. So I was thrilled. Here's some pictures from that training. I took some screenshots of the Zooms that we did. So this is that very first seminar for faculty, administration, and staff. So pretty good turnout, and there were also a number of people on the call that you can't see that just were there on their audio. The training for students, let me tell you a little bit more about what that looked like. So their initial training was this Simulation 101. I had 14 students, even after school had ended for the semester, right? Because it was the end of May, 14 students joined us virtually for this training. I wasn't sure if I'd get anyone because none of us knew what was happening in the world, but 14 students. So they had this first training, which was Simulation 101, what is it and why should you care? And you can see Dr. Carey and Daniel up here in the up left corner. Then we also did this thing called Symprovisation, which was a lot of the time spent with Trajectory, where we spent 3 hours, you can see the timestamp there, doing an improvisation within a simulation scenario, right? And knowing that he was working with actors, because often they'll train people who are not actors to serve as standardized patients or simulated patients. So how do we take the vocabulary that we already have, the training that we already have, the techniques that we're already using, and frame them into this world of simulation? And every single thing that we talked about in simulation is something that is also applicable to what I teach in my acting classes. I thought it really just enhanced what we already have, talking about mindfulness and presence and listening. So that was really exciting. And I think helpful for the students to know that they already were exercising a lot of these skills. The last part of the training was, this would not have happened if we'd been in person. So I was really excited about this, was we actually ran scenarios. We were given 2 scenarios by trajectory. We split the students in half, so 7 worked on one scenario and 7 worked on the other. And then we had an opportunity to come in. The acting students served as the standardized patients. Daniel Haley served as the trainee, the student from the healthcare profession. It was actually a veterinary student. And then Dr. Carey served as his teacher in the scenario. And every single student had an opportunity to do it, which was really exciting. And then we had the debriefing afterwards. I also, as a part of this grant, I was trying to forward think, right? And we often get questions about those emergency scenarios. And if we have students, either actors or makeup students, that can support these emergency scenarios. And so I thought an investment in what we call a moulage kit, which is like emergency makeup, would be really helpful. And already this year, we've had a request from our law enforcement training program here on campus to support them in a scenario just like that. So we now have one. And I took some closer pictures for you so you can see some of the awesome things in there. Mint flavored stage blood, very exciting. Simulated bone wax, thick blood, latex rubber prosthetics, scar wax, latex, all of those things. Very exciting for acting students and makeup students to work within. Okay, so talking about outcomes. Yes, I feel like we accomplished our goals in the sense that we brought people together from across our campus that hadn't interacted really before. So even if it were just Danny and Melody and I talking about what we could do in the future, that would have been magnificent. But being able to bring Danny and Melody in to talk to my students about their why was really important. I should also mention that I am currently helping my students to prepare for an actual simulation that they're going to do with our healthcare students, specifically athletic training. It'll be happening in just a couple of weeks, and I have 14 students that will be participating. Half of them did the trajectory training with me this summer, which is really incredible. So now I feel much more confident in helping to facilitate their training as they move forward. And I see the great ripple effect of how this will just grow and grow and grow. That viability of the theater degree, some of the students that trained with us this summer had just graduated and are now living in big cities and are able to go into, get their foot in the door in a different way, right? Not just approaching theater companies, which right now is a really difficult time to do that, but approaching educational training programs as well as healthcare, the healthcare industry to service standardized patients. They've got the training on the resumes already. And as I mentioned, as these simulations continue to happen on campus, we'll add that to their resumes. And then for me, being able to feel empowered to better serve my students and find those best practices within the framework of simulation. This is not something I ever thought that I would be involved in. I know that I still have a lot to learn, but this was a wonderful, I was going to say first step, but really a leap forward in the right direction for simulation to empower all of us. Here are some of the references from the quotes that I mentioned earlier in this project about what is simulation and a standardized patients, what that means. And I know since I'm not with you synchronously, if you have any questions about anything that I mentioned in this presentation, you're more than welcome to email me. That's my email right there, or you can reach out to Karen and she can pass that forward to me. So I just wanted to say thank you to Karen and Margaret for their support. This is a really cool training opportunity that I wouldn't have pursued without this funding. And I'm really excited to see where this will go next, right? What's going to happen for ISU, because it's really, raising the bar together in an interdisciplinary way, which is really exciting. Thanks so much.
Okay, so yes, if you have any questions for Vanessa, a fascinating project, and I can tell you as a faculty member in the Human Performance and Sports Studies Department, which many of my students are in athletic training, they've really been having fun with the moulage kit, and it's kind of horrifying sometimes. It's very realistic. So if you do have questions for Vanessa, if that was too quick for you, please reach out to me and I will make sure that I get you her contact information. So our fourth presentation is by Samantha Blatt from the Department of Anthropology. Samantha will be discussing her project on touching science, creating an inclusive learning environment for visually impaired students in laboratory courses. So Sam, the floor is yours.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. All right. So thank you everyone for being here. This project was inspired by a student who was born blind and luckily for me, found their way into my classroom and really became integral to how I consider inclusive practices. And blind and low vision or BLV students are marginalized generally and underrepresented in scientific fields. And this is not for lack of interest. Throughout schooling, they encounter limited accessible opportunities to experience science or strong mentorship, encouraging lifelong scientific literacy or occupational training in STEM. And science involves abstract concepts which normalize visual phenomena so they can seem inaccessible to BLV students, but by its nature, science is not limited to the visual world. After all, we can't see gravity, but we can witness its results. And educators are infrequently trained in accommodating lab needs of BLV students and equally lacking in knowledge about assistive technology or AT options. And my objective is to lower barriers of academic success of BLV students in lab courses like my own biological anthropology lab course and raise expectations of BLV students in sciences. And there are helpful resources in some fields, but surprisingly not in anthropology. So prior to the pandemic, I proposed assessing belonging and performative success from integrating AT and inclusive measures for BLV and sighted students. And so the plan was, and it still is, it's ongoing, to collect feedback regarding learning and attitudinal gains. So last spring, I interviewed a blind student who completed the biological anthropology lab, and this student previously failed a college course, science course, without inclusive strategies meeting their needs. And the student really celebrated the tactile and auditory accommodations from my course, specifically the use of manipulative 3D casts and that model evolution through fossils, and shared these learning tactics with sighted students who then used a blind box for identification by touch. And images and charts on exams and assignments were narrated in great detail, just as they were in lectures. And this was helpful also to both sighted and the blind student in their exam performance. So anatomical understanding was also transferred to experimental testing, physical adaptations like bipedalism, in which BLV students can really easily participate without modification, and even taste and smell, seen in this student's facial reaction in the bottom right to tasting durian fruit, which is a favorite of Gigantopithecus, are teaching moments. And another success for all students was the use of audio comparisons of primate calls and alerts through analyses of pitch and waves of sound via software. And this replaced prior exclusively visual observations of primate behavior. And genetic and geological topics were a bit more challenging, but use of tactile models, textured simulations, and use of the Novant Falcon controller allow haptic and kinesthetic adaptations for these things. So having a para-educator in the course was useful, but it did have a mal-effect of limiting peer interaction, which really curtailed overall a sense of belonging for this BLV student. So it's hoped that with the purchase of raised graphing paper and sensation boards and things like sandpaper cardstock and braille calipers and talking measuring equipment, that this will increase independence of BLV students and therefore peer learning overall. So some universal take-homes of my experience include always, of course, first orienting BLV students regarding lab safety and the bench materials in front of them, realizing that para-educators and AT are really great, but they are not a replacement for peer learning, which really fosters that sense of belonging, beneficial to all students and to the class dynamic. Also, inclusivity refers to everyone and positively impacts the performance of all students. So labs that are modified for accommodating one student should be practiced with all students. And raised diagrams, which are readily available, aren't really good enough since they do require a learning curve for BLV students. So 3D is better, and even better than that is providing some type of take-home resource, and you can get really creative, and this can be done pretty cheaply as well. And then finally, reflection of the shortcomings of on-the-fly adjustment is necessary, as is collaborating with a BLV student about what is and is not working, as well as their comfort levels. So tactile, haptic, auditory, and kinesthetic adaptations through assistive technology and other studies measurably increase performance among BLV students. And so, but beyond grades, combining AT with peer interaction is really gives the best outcome with a heightened sense of belonging, which is really the glue that binds all inclusive teaching and learning practices. And a sense of belonging has been shown to translate into college retention and increased performance for all students. So an inclusive environment also begins really the first day of class, and there are a lot of evidence-based icebreakers that hone universal belonging and empathy, especially breaking the in the air biases impacting marginalized students that affect marginalized students the most. And so the infographic created here on the right is really just to inform instructors about possibilities of providing equitable labs for BLV students with some tips and some of the best resources that I found that I used. And I also will be sharing a G Drive folder of living resources and assignment examples from anthropology that also would be helpful in biology and some other sciences. And I'm going to put that link in the chat here, and it'll be available in other places too. So that was really fast. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, if there aren't any questions for Sam, I hope it's okay. I noticed that Dr. Kickham is here as well. I'd like to maybe give a plug, because Sam will be doing another presentation on inclusive teaching practices at our Indigenous Peoples Day, which is October 12th. And I don't know what your presentation on, Sam, but I know it will be a continuation of this good conversation.
Yeah, indigenizing pedagogies. So yeah, lots of inclusive teaching strategies.
Awesome. So we'll also post all of that information on the Program for Instructional Effectiveness website.
I do have a question for Dr. Black.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how did the non-visually impaired students in the class react to the activity modifications?
So I've actually used some of them since, and have asked students who are in the class with the blind student, and they particularly like additional hands-on is like the better, the more hands-on the better, and they really love the audio stuff. Like they never had thought about trying to think about behavior without looking at it. And so that one I absolutely I'm using right now, even on the online version of the class. And yeah, they were also very helpful and patient, and loved the, anything, the blind box that I talked about, where you basically reach your hand in there and identify stuff. They love that too. And that, so do I, because it's entertaining for me too, but yeah.
Well, Sam, thank you very much. And it was an excellent presentation. And so up next, we have Alex Bollinger from the Department of Management. And Alex is going to share the background and information on his grant, which was entitled Showing Students Their Why, Designing an Interactive First Year Keystone Course in Business. So Alex.
All right, thank you, Karen. Thank you everyone for being here today. So I want to talk a little bit about this project. My involvement with this project, the idea for it goes back a ways to when I was a student in the College of Business, which has been a while ago. And the College of Business, as any university, and this is true at most universities, has always kind of tried to work harder and harder to retain students, especially sort of in their earlier stages of their career. And colleges of business have a particular challenge because so much of our coursework is in the junior and senior years. And so oftentimes we don't see students as much in sort of their freshman and sophomore years as they're getting sort of generals out of the way and so forth. And so we've been very thoughtful about that in the College of Business. How do we get sort of more of that touch in the earlier stages with students? And one of the ways in which we do that is to have an introduction to business class where we sort of teach them about a little bit about all of the different disciplines in business. So a little bit about accounting, a little bit about finance, a little bit about management, a little bit about marketing and so forth, and how those pieces fit together. But the thought process goes back again to this idea of showing students their why, and the university community's focus on the Sinek book talking about starting with your why. And one of the things that we've discovered is that it's important for students in addition to faculty and staff and administration, right? And the kinds of questions that we're asking students to ask are not just sort of the big picture questions, right? You know, what am I, you know, why am I going to college? Why am I majoring in business specifically? What do I want to get out of my degree? But there are also more proximal questions, which are, if I'm an accounting major, why am I taking marketing classes, or vice versa, right? And so, so much of what happens, and one of the things that we've found is that we want students to understand kind of the big picture from the very beginning. And we've tried to figure out ways to kind of redesign this introductory, this first year experience class to capture that a bit. Let me tell you a little bit about what a typical curriculum has looked like traditionally in a business school. You start from sort of the beginning of the program, and the first time that we get access to students, we tend to focus in on sort of specific courses that give them a lot of detail. So they'll take a course, for example, in accounting, and they'll get a lot of detail about accounting and a class in marketing. And we sort of build that up to the very end of their program. And we have a capstone course where we talk about sort of the big picture. How do marketing and accounting and finance and management and all of these different things fit together when you're running a business? And it's a traditional model, and it's worked well in many ways. But what we were finding, so I've had the opportunity to teach the capstone course, and what I found is that students continually ask me, they'll say things like, gosh, I wish I'd known this 4 years ago, or, you know, oh, wow, now this all makes sense. And so our question was, well, is it possible to sort of shift that to almost flip the script a bit so that students can understand kind of the bigger picture earlier, so that when they take those individual classes, they understand, oh yeah, well, I'm taking accounting because it affects marketing in such and such a way, or on they go. So the goal is to make it more relevant, to give students a line of sight so they can kind of see the bigger picture and how what they're doing now fits into the rest of their program, and more importantly, into their career, which is so critical for their motivation. And then just to give them a vocabulary so that when they get into their first marketing class, they already know kind of what the 4 Ps are, right? Or they get into a finance class, they have some idea of a discounted cash flow. At least they know the idea behind it, and then they can get the details of the concept when they get to that point. So what this grant gave me the opportunity to do in partnership with several of my colleagues in the College of Business is to sort of rethink this business curriculum, and specifically to rethink the introductory class. And so to start by actually giving students sort of a big picture overview of what business is all about. And so what we do is we start off the class by, the idea with this redesign is to kind of walk through each of the functional areas and just to kind of give them an overview. So a day spent on marketing, a day spent on finance, et cetera. And then they engage in a computerized simulation, and they get into groups and they run their own company for a series of simulated years. And they get to try things out, and they find out, you know, this is what happens if I spend this much on marketing, my promotional budget, well, this takes away a certain amount from my financing, right? Opportunities, this kind of thing. And so it gives students the opportunity to see how those things play out. It also gives them a chance, as part of this class, we've put together within the College of Business a pitch competition, an entrepreneurial pitch competition. So Students come up with a product idea and they work in pairs to come up with a pitch. And my colleague, Dr. Jeff Street, has come up with funding and from a local company, and we actually have judges come in from this same company, and the students compete and have a chance to see what it's like to actually pitch a product to a venture capital firm, for example, if they were hopefully something that they'll do in the future as well. So really this grant has allowed us to sort of change the metaphor. I guess one way to think about it, and it's an imperfect metaphor, but those of you who like to do home remodels, maybe this will resonate, right? Instead of putting down individual tiles and sort of building up the tile wall, if you will, sort of tile by tile, the goal with this class is to say, okay, let's put down a framework here. Let's put a mastic or something like that. In other words, this course is kind of like a glue. It's kind of a mortar that allows students to understand where all of these pieces are going to fit in. And then as the pieces fit in one at a time, as they progress through their programs, they can get a better sense for, okay, I see how this fits together, and they have a better understanding from the get-go. So the kinds of outcomes that we hope to see, and this is both short-term and longer term, are things like a better ability to speak the language of business, the different business disciplines, but also we hope that it increases student motivation as they go through their program. And ultimately associated with that we see better retention, especially in those critical first 6 to 8 weeks of their first semester, which are just so critical to retaining our students. And then ultimately, long-term, what we're hoping for is as we follow up with employers who end up hiring our graduates, we hope that they have higher satisfaction levels of students' sort of overall knowledge of business and their skill set that they're bringing out into the workforce. So just a couple of things about the timeline and how this actually played out. I was just really excited to get this grant, and we kicked it off in January. Had the chance to coordinate with my colleagues. We have 5 or 6 sections of this class, and so I teach one section, but other colleagues are teaching sections of it as well. And we really focused on retention and sort of how do we capture people in those first few weeks. What of course has changed is that in a COVID environment, as we do this first round of classes here in the fall, rather than having them in person, they're online via Zoom, or in one case asynchronous. And so we've had to shift that curriculum a little bit. But remarkably, it's been pretty robust. It's actually worked out really well, even in an online environment, which is really delightful. We came up with my colleague, Dr. Jeff Street, the entrepreneurial pitch competition, and put that together. I was, as part of this grant, it was going to fund an opportunity for me to visit the Seattle area to see a colleague at Pacific Lutheran University who does something very similar to this. And then COVID hit the week that I was supposed to travel. And of course, Seattle was one of the first cities to shut down. So we replaced that with a series of virtual meetings, which actually worked out really well. Similar to what Vanessa said, I actually had more contact points just by being able to have multiple Zoom meetings with Dr. Brown rather than sort of that one visit. And then I really credit Karen and Margaret for this opportunity, because since I didn't have the chance to travel, I had the opportunity to reallocate some of those funds to pilot test a leadership activity that I plan to use in this class as well, which I think is going to be yet another value add to this program. So ultimately, the initial feedback has been really enthusiastic, which is fantastic. Our retention rates have been really good in this class, which better even than maybe historically. So that's been a real positive. And then what we recognize is that it will take years down the road. Even for some of these students, we won't see all the fruits of it until they get out into the workforce and we hear back from employers about how things went. So, but we see this as something that will be institutionalized and we'll continue to use it. And it's not instructor specific. So even if there comes a time when I'm no longer teaching the course, others will be able to take the reins and use this template and just sort of be able to move forward with that. And ultimately, our goal is to continually assess the feedback that we get from this and also student performance. And what's helpful about this is that the College of Business already assesses many of these outcomes, but what this will allow us to do is to assess them more intentionally and to do comparisons among years, for example, of students, cohorts. And so we'll be able to see kind of the difference that being able to have this first year exposure relative to those who didn't have that opportunity. We'll see some of the differences and be able to fine tune this program going forward. So anyway, thank you, and I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you, Alex. Questions for Alex? Hold on one second. I don't see anybody with a, nope. Well, Alex, I have a question for you. I teach a senior capstone class as well. And you said something early in your presentation that I've heard a lot. Why haven't we heard this until now? We're getting ready to leave, and so we have a sort of a similar class, and I'm inspired by this because our class could be much more intentional. A foundations class that students will start a professional portfolio there, and then in their capstone class. What I find when I say to my students, well, remember in foundations class, you started some of these pieces. What I find is oftentimes between their freshman and senior year, lots of things happen and they sort of forget. So 2 questions I'm curious about. A, do you have the faculty members who are teaching both of those classes sort of working together so that they communicate back and forth about you'll learn this in foundations, you'll need this in senior capstone? And are there any other checkpoints on some of the things that they do in the class throughout their curriculum that build on those things so that when they get to the final capstone, they're thinking, oh, yes, I remember this.
This is fantastic, Karen. You've anticipated sort of the next 2 steps as I've sort of been thinking about. So, I mean, I think our experiences are very similar in this respect. Yeah, I think you're right. There's one of the advantages, one of the questions that was asked was, well, is there redundancy between having sort of a senior level capstone and sort of a freshman level experience where they're getting this overview? And you're right, the answer is no, because there's a lot of time that elapses between the 2, and they've become a lot more, hopefully, mature in their understanding by the time they get to that senior level capstone. But I think you're right as well, that it would be really helpful to have those touchstones along the way. And I think, this is, it speaks to the idea that it takes a village with these kinds of, implementing these kinds of things sort of discipline-wide, and ultimately the goal, I mean, within this class, we're able to be more integrative and sort of looking across disciplines. But to, the holy grail, if you will, for a College of Business is to be able to do that across every course. And so that's an ongoing project, I think.
Thank
I have
you.
a quick question. How do you deal with, so I love this idea, but how would you help or encourage somebody that's transferring from another institution and maybe has some credits under their belt already, or like we're seeing a lot of our students coming in with almost 2 years of education? Is that still something that's required as a business student to take?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the short answer is no, right? If they've got the transfer credits, they typically can substitute something for that. But what's really interesting, and granted, we're only in our first semester with this course, so things may play out differently over time. But I have a class, a section of the class this semester, and I would say fully a third of the class are upperclassmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, who I think, speaking to your question, see that this is a value add. They like this idea of getting a big picture understanding of business, realize that they've missed that, and they're going back voluntarily to do that, to make sure they get that. So I think that's another vote for that students see the benefit of this. And I think you're right. Eventually, we may have to sort of put the framework into place to make sure everyone gets this experience, regardless of when they enter our program.
I think that would be great. It's interesting, the software that you talked about, I took something similar and it was towards the end of my business degree. And so being able to kind of see how all of the disciplines kind of connect, marketing, accounting, management, I think would really motivate actually students to really take some of the other courses that they might not be as invested in. I was like, oh, actually, I should be more invested in accounting, even though my focus is in management.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other sort of benefit from this that I didn't anticipate is that a lot of students, it's kind of an overview. So they kind of get a sense, they know that they want to be in business, but they don't know exactly what area really grabs their attention. And they discover, oh, marketing is really where my passion is, or finance. And so it's a great sort of career preparation course as well.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Presentation. Okay, up next from the Department of Mathematics and Statistics is Jessica Shee, who received a grant to promote a project-driven teaching mode in differential equations, which is Math 33660. So Jessica, you're up.
Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you for this grant, this opportunity for me to develop this project. The title is Promoting a Project-Driven Teaching Mode for Differential Equations. Oops. All right, so I have been teaching the differential equation course, Math 3360, many times. That is a required course for our bachelor degree, and it's also optional courses for other degrees like in physics, biology, and engineering. So we do have a diversity of audience in this course because like more than 70% of students in this course, they are majoring in physics, engineering, and maybe chemistry, biology. They are not majoring in mathematics. So given the diversity of the audience, and we try to find a way to motivate students to learn. So the main goal of the project is to shift the emphasis away from the rotate applications of formulas and toward a numerical, graphically understanding and a practical approach to solve real world problems. That will in turn motivate students to learn. They know why we learn this theory. They know how this theory can be applied, right? So basically, if we compare the traditional way of teaching and the project-driven teaching mode, they're almost the same. But the main difference is that in the traditional way of teaching, the focus is this part, the red one, how to solve a math problem. For example, in this class, how to solve a differential equation, right? You have to apply all kinds of techniques, formulas, and to solve it. And students take a lot of time to do this kind of things. But for the exercises problem they are doing, they are just from textbook. The problems are designed such that the formulas can be applied. There's no other application driven. So basically, but here, if we take a look at the big picture of how the differential equation is applied in real life, actually we start from a real world problem, kind of some problem that is stated in terms of common language, not in terms of differential equations or derivatives. And then people usually, what's next gonna be people are gonna do the simulation, data collection, data visualization, modeling, and then it comes to the problem solving part. After the problem solving is not done, story is continuing. Okay, we have some story after that, very important ones, such as model validation, interpretation, and eventually you have to answer the original question using the language of the background of problem, not using the mathematical language. So basically that is the big picture, such that how the differential equation theory is applied in real life. But in the traditional way of teaching, students can only touch the red one, which is the problem solving part. And the project-driven teaching mode will allow students to see the complete cycle. They will start from a problem, So that is kind of real world problem. They will do everything until finally they're gonna finalize it with the report and the presentation. So instead of focusing on just like solving problem in the formulas or just formula memorizations, they're gonna take a look at, okay, what's happening before that and what's happening after that. And as we know that in workforce, the skills, okay, I just listed some skills. So even though the skills are changing year to year, but there is something in common. For example, students like graduated from either math major or like computer science major or like physics major. They need to know how to solve a complex problem, not a problem from a textbook, but a problem from the real world. And they need to know how to do collaborations with others, how to do teamwork, and something like they need to know how to make decisions and how to do the writings, communications. Those skills needed in workforce are not well practiced in the traditional way of thinking, because by doing homework problems that is from textbook, they do not have opportunity to do such kind of to like communicate with others or to like do report writing, things like that. Okay, so our objective, the significance of this project is to give the student opportunity to practice for those workforce skills, and then start with a project-driven problem. So they have the motivation. They know why or how we need to learn this, why we are going to learn this, and how this one can be applied. And they can just like ask some other deeper questions. And also there's some reflection revision, because in their report writing and during the collaboration with their classmates, they're gonna just like go ahead to revisit the problem or go ahead to revisit the concept they have learned in class and think something like how I can apply those concepts in this totally new background. The objective is I used the one course release. I received one course release in spring 2020, and I developed a project-driven package. And then the second one is try to promote this project-driven mode so that it can be adopted in all sections in different trading and also other courses in like, say for example, Calculus 2. Okay. Now the outcomes here, actually, most of the objectives are accomplished. The outcome includes the project description. The project is a semester-long project, so it contains 6 parts. So basically, each part is due in 2 weeks. Students forming groups, and in each 2 weeks, they're gonna finish one part. So basically, they are building up their skills and accumulating what's on the report week by week. So in the end, I will collect and grade their weekly report so that I will make sure that each group, they are working in the correct direction. Because I know that due to the variation of students, there are some excellent students who are very active and who are very, they have the ability to do kind of almost everything. But there are some students who is a little bit weaker. So basically, I do not want to wait till the last week to collect the report. Instead, I'm collecting something they have done every week, so that I can make sure that all the students, they are doing their jobs, they are doing their responsibilities every week. And I provide a project rubrics that is given in a Google Sheet so that I can share the grades and the grading rubrics with all the students online. Okay, and also I provided the project templates and the project case. This material is motivated from an open resource from the same ODE. That's a citation here. Okay, so here the implementation is this project-driven mode is modified from the traditional teaching mode. Okay, in addition to the homework, exam, final exam, I just add one more assignment called project. Okay, that's the only difference. I'm not replacing everything but project. I just added project as the additional way for the assessment. This is distance-based teamwork, okay? Because students forming teams, they form teams and they do not need to meet face-to-face. They can do all the simulation, data collection online during the Zoom meeting. That is, I'm gonna provide timely feedback, like I will grade and give feedback to their work every 2 weeks. okay, every other week. And it is adaptable to other courses. For example, this semester, I'm teaching Calculus 2, 1175. I kind of modified this project a little bit. And then right now I'm using the kind of the same framework in this Calculus 2 class. The feedback is really good, okay? And it is also adaptable to other background. Currently, this model is called, this project is called Simulating the Spread of the Common Cold. I chose this one just because this is COVID-19, due to the pandemic. So this is a very hot topic. For example, you can just in this very simplified model, this is a dorm of students. Suppose someone is affected. So student they can do something like that. Suppose someone is affected, then they can just put a mark there. And then this one affected gonna hang around and leave traces of the virus. So then they maybe leave traces here or leave traces here. For all the traces left, the new person is gonna be affected. So if there's a new person infected, you're gonna mark the room the person lived in, and so on. So after several rounds, maybe 14 rounds, all the residents living in this dorm are affected. And students are collecting data and record the data in a spreadsheet. That is the shared Google spreadsheet. That is how they're gonna do the simulation. So that can be done totally virtually. They do not need to meet face-to-face. And we have minimum programming requirement. Originally, I thought I want to ask students to do everything in Python, but turns out that some students have zero experience in Python or in other programs. So right now I redesigned that such that they can do all the calculation, data collection, data visualization using Excel, which is easy and which is accessible. If there are some students who prefer to do Python, they can of course do that. But Excel is the kind of the minimum requirement so that everyone are able to do. So in this model, I just give them several options. They can do the normal one, just like people hang out and affect more people, or they can do some other models, like we can do the cleaning, like if there's people visited some public places, and if with the cleaning, so like then the new people going through the public place, they will not be affected. Or we can reduce exposure. So they can try the normal one or try the scenario A, scenario B, or both A and B. They will see that through the simulation, they will really see that, okay, by doing either the cleaning or the reducing the exposure, the spread of disease can be slowed down. They are told to do that, wash your hand and try to stay at home. They are told to do that. And then they will see the evidence why they are doing that. Because by doing that, the spread of disease can be significantly slowed down. Okay. The student population that can be impacted will be all the students, gonna be all the students taking different current courses, and also potentially there can be students who are taking, say, Calculus 2 classes. Right now, the students in my Calculus 2 class, they are doing the project assignment. Okay, we have a newly launched applied math major. So with this new applied math major, we have these 3 new objectivities. These 3 objectivities cannot be fulfilled using the traditional way of teaching, but it will be achieved using the project-driven teaching mode, because students will be able to design the mathematical model and they can communicate with each other, do the teamwork, and also they can use Excel or Python or other computer technologies, softwares to facilitate their solving problem and also do the data visualization. Okay, finally the plan for the assessment. So I'm gonna keep track. Let me clean this one. Okay, I'm gonna keep tracking the sections that that are gonna be implement such kind of project-driven mode, and I will compare the data like the passing rate, retention rate of sections who are using this mode versus sections who are using the traditional teaching mode. And I will contact instructors who are teaching the say Calculus 1, Calculus 2, also or mathematical modeling courses using this project-driven mode. Collect feedback from students who experienced such kind of teaching-driven mode. And from my experience, like in this Calculus 2 class I'm teaching, students they give me good feedback. And during the office hours, students jump in during office hours, and most of the questions are coming from the projects. So even in this like distance learning based, I can kind of interact with students more closely. So I can just get more students engaged. And moreover, during the pandemic and after the COVID-19, maybe some courses, some sections will be offered like distance-based learning. So in the distance-based learning, this project assignment fits the distance-based learning perfectly. So that's why I see, even though so far, okay, before the COVID-19, all the classes in our department are just like face-to-face. But after the pandemic, maybe there are some distance-based options. And for the distance-based classes, instructors can adopt such kind of teaching-driven mode. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Questions, comments?
Hi, Jessica. Barb Gordon with Nutrition and Dietetics. I think this is a wonderful way to learn math. One question I have is something I kind of struggle with. I do a similar thing in a nutrition epi class I teach. Where I have them actually in groups putting together a nutrition epi study protocol, and I have it divided across the semester. But I struggle with whether or not to have them assess their teammates in terms of level of participation. And so I sort of wonder what your decision was in terms of that group dynamic, whether you have them doing an assessment of each other and how much they're contributing to the team or not.
Okay, that's a good question. And thank you for bringing it out. Yes, you're right. For example, in this case, I have a team of 3 or team of 4. Basically, what I'm going to do is, first, all the team members will receive the same points, same grade. I'm not asking the team members like writing like comments or whatever for their teammates, but I'm trying to make sure that each team have a kind of team manager, like leader. So that leader will assign the roles for each team member. If no one wants to be the leader, I can be the leader. So when I'm grading their reports, because they're going to submit the report, I will make sure that, okay, the contributions of each team member is fairly distributed. So that is kind of my way to do that. I do have some colleagues who are teaching the mathematical modeling, such that they require some students to evaluate their team members, but I'm not doing that. I just, because for example, if I can see that there's a student in a group who is kind of very weak or not very active for 1 week, then I will be able to see that during my report. And I will talk to that student and try to make sure that they know what to do for the next assignment and so on. So basically, if you tell students what you need to do, what your role is, then they can go ahead and follow your instructions. That's my way to solve this problem. Maybe this is not perfect, but yeah, that's kind of some suggestions.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great way to get students, to have them have a specific role, to get them to be more invested in that particular role and get everybody to work together. That's a great suggestion, Jessica.
Thank you.
So thank you for your presentation. And our next presenter is Anna Grinneth from the Department of Biological Sciences. Anna is going to share information on her grant project, which was the design and implementation of a data maker biology instructional module for a large introductory biology lecture course. So Anna.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Jessica, that was a really exciting presentation. And I feel like there's some points of contact between our 2 presentations. So I'm glad we're going back to back. And I also want to mention I'm presenting today with my graduate student, Alyssa Freeman. And so first I'll provide us with some short background. So in academic disciplines, what we know, In academic disciplines, what we know is only accepted in light of the practices and processes deployed to construct, critique, and revise that knowledge. So there's an understanding that conceptual structures, epistemic practices, and social processes are all equally essential to generating new knowledge. However, commonly, our students come to understand biological knowledge as just a collection of facts about the world. So to address this problem, my collaborator and I have developed a framework to guide the design of instruction that integrates core concepts with the epistemic practices in the form of data modeling and social processes in the form of scientific argumentation. The Data Maker Biology Design Framework first guides us to identify an appropriate data modeling practice for our students, which are listed below, the 5 main data modeling practices that we think about. And then we select a biological context that can evoke that practice from our students and situate the conceptual learning. And then we engage students in epistemic practices and social processes to deeply develop these conceptual structures. I'm not going to walk through each part of the framework, but over here on the right-hand side, there's a nice mix between epistemic practices, social processes, and developing conceptual structures. And so we've tested this framework by designing a lesson on sponge filter feeding ecology, which is the biological context that I'm most familiar with. And this provides an appropriate context for data modeling practices in the form of problematizing biologically meaningful measurement, structuring data as distribution, inventing statistics to measure distributional characteristics, and then the social processes of constructing and critiquing claims about sponge filtering power. And so in this teaching innovation grant, our objectives and products were to implement this instructional module in a new context to test its stability, to create a digital instructor guide to disseminate the module widely beyond ISU, to examine module implementation across 3 different contexts, to then design educative features for that instructor guide, and to design a new task to support students in thinking about covariation, which is the 5th data modeling practice we wanted to include. And so now I'll turn it over to Alyssa, who's going to expand on what a digital instructor guide is, what educative features are, and tell you a bit about that covariation task.
Thank you, Anna. So the first product we will start with is a digital instructor guide. This begins with a brief overview of the different areas of focus within this sponge module. So that's a social practice, the data focus, biology content focus, and argumentation. This is then followed by a brief overview of each of the 4 lessons within the sponge module. This is then followed by detailed information regarding each lesson, including learning objectives and a learning plan. The learning plan consists of kind of a lesson breakdown with corresponding time estimates and PowerPoint slides for teachers. A key design element that was considered while developing the digital instructor guide was incorporating educative features. And these are features that are intentionally designed within curriculum materials to promote both teacher and student learning. Davis and Krajek identified design heuristics that curriculum materials should implement in order to be considered educative. These are a focus on topic-specific phenomena, supporting teachers in developing content knowledge, supporting teachers in anticipating and eliciting student ideas during discussions, and then supporting teachers in engaging students with data analysis, data creation, creating evidence-based explanations, and scientific communication. While all of the design heuristics developed by Davis and Krajek were considered when developing this digital instructor guide, we would like to specifically highlight features incorporated for eliciting and anticipating student responses. In the teacher's guide, that learning planning section of each lesson is broken down and suggested prompts and student answers have been identified. These teacher questions and student responses have been taken from video analysis of the sponge module being enacted in classrooms, specifically a non-science majors general biology course and introductory Bio 1 and Bio 2 courses. The next product of this project was the development of that covariation task. And this task was designed as lesson 3 within that 4-lesson framework of this module. It helps students transition from a repeated measures distribution completed in previous lessons to a bivariate relationship. It focuses on the guiding question of determining the relationship between sponge volume and filtration rate. Students are given data regarding 13 sponge individuals, and they must make choices when trying to decide what data would provide the most meaningful information about sponge filtration rate in order to answer that guiding question. Here we have a graph with potential student answers, and as different colors indicate, students can approach this task in a few different ways, leading to meaningful class argumentation sessions.
Great, and our last slide here just sums up the impact and sustainability of this project. So currently 430 undergraduate students have been impacted and another 150 more in spring 2021 when we get to implement this module in another Bio 1 class. And as part of the project, we did think about how to modify the module so that we could do this module in a physically distanced learning environment. And then we've also been working to disseminate the module widely because we think it's a helpful module for interdisciplinary teaching of both data modeling and helping students think about statistics with biological concepts. And so 4 additional instructors at 2 other universities are using the module currently. And then 9 pre-service biology instructors who are going to go on to their own classrooms have been taught about the module, the evidence behind the module, and how it supports student learning in the biology teaching methods class. And our next steps are going to be to pilot the new covariation task. Alyssa will be doing that in the biology teaching methods course this month. And then also this project is helping us to revise our next try at an NSF Improving Undergraduate STEM Education grant proposal. And then lastly, what I'm really excited about with this design framework is that while we situated the first module in a sponge filter feeding ecology problem, because that was what my master's work was in, this module is meant to be situated in lots of different contexts. And so collaborating with biology colleagues or colleagues across campus to develop new modules that are situated in the context of their research is something that we're really excited about. And with that, we'll take questions or comments.
Thank you both for your presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the other universities that this is being used at right now. Are you finding the same sorts of results as they're finding? Are there any differences between the different locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the other university that it's being used at is a university that was using it at the same time. My collaborator is at that university. And so as we've been developing the module, we've been able to test it in the biology departments of both of these universities. And it is interesting how similar it is across universities, but also across the different contexts. So implementing it in a non-science majors course or a biology 1 course or biology 2 course, a lot of similar ideas and ways of thinking about how to make sense of the data and how when we have students invent the statistics they're going to use to describe the distribution of their repeated measures data. A lot of the approaches and ways of thinking are very similar and consistent. And then the main difference we found is not necessarily between universities, but between those 3 different course contexts where we might modify the story of the sponge filter feeding ecology and our learning objectives a bit as we go from the biology 1 to the biology 2 courses. And students also do seem to be well, not obviously, but they do seem to be more familiar with incorporating statistical ideas into their thinking about the biology question. But at the same time, even if they're more confident with ideas of measures of center or measures of spread, like the concept of standard deviation, they haven't always had a chance to really think through what does that measure of standard deviation mean. And so I think even if they're really comfortable with analyzing their data in terms of the variation in standard deviation, they do appreciate a chance to really think about where those measurements are coming from.
Thank you, Anna and Alyssa. And Alyssa, I apologize that I didn't introduce you as one of the co-authors on this. You did a fantastic job.
No worries. Thank you.
Yes, well, very, very well done. So our last, but certainly not least, presentation this evening is from Susan Tavernier and from the Department of Nursing and Barb Gordon from the Department of Nutrition and Dietetics, who are putting students in the driver's seat They looked at a participatory approach to developing an interprofessional course on palliative care. So, Barb.
I'm going to start off with our interprofessional presentation. And Vanessa kind of set the stage for us in talking about the importance of interprofessional collaboration within a clinical setting. And it's really imperative in terms of good patient outcomes. So we had the challenge, a group of interprofessional faculty from Meridian, of putting together a palliative care course for our students. And this grant really gave us the luxury to do something that I think most faculty don't get to do. When you actually look at curriculum development from an instructional design lens, the first step is to do a learner needs analysis. So you really assess that specific group of learners in detail. And so what we did was actually, as faculty, ask the students to think about what their needs were. So we put them in the driver's seat in terms of conducting a learner needs analysis, students with students, in order to get a sense of what the interprofessional learner needs are. So next slide, Susan is driving. Oh, did I lose her? I might have lost her. Okay, well, I'm going to go on to the next slide. And
I'm trying to figure out why it won't go forward.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to go into this one.
We knew that as faculty, we knew there were a lot of misunderstandings about palliative care. So we kind of brought to this project our own opinions, our own perspectives. We also know that there were different levels of education about palliative care in the different disciplines. But our goal really was, and this was our innovation, that we put ourselves outside of the process and tried to have this conversation where students were talking to students and that they were coming up with what did they need to know. And so in addition to giving us some good insights, they also learned a lot from each other. And it was neat to see the conversations. And even when we had to revert to Zoom, and Susan will get into that, so I'm gonna finish in a second, Susan. Even when we had to convert to Zoom, they still had some of these little sidebars where they were having aha moments about the differences in the different disciplines. So I thought that was really cool. And with that, I'll turn it over to my interprofessional colleague.
Thanks, Barbara. And so within this project, we had actually, let me get to the next slide here, had multiple disciplines. As you can tell, it was an interprofessional project and team actually working on it. We had originally proposed to have 4 in-person focus groups. We were going to try and draw them by providing some snacks and having it when they were going to be on campus anyway. It was we had planned on graduate students here on the Meridian campus to start out with. We wanted to eventually roll that out over to the Pocatello, but we were starting with the Meridian. And I think one of the unique characteristics was that we were dealing with graduate students. And so we did have graduate student facilitators who went through some training. And that's how we got this student-to-student interaction instead of we as faculty being there. We ended up having one in-person. We did have one in-person session before COVID hit. And then we finished up with 3 Zoom sessions. I would say the comment there in that change is, in some situations, I have found Zoom to be extremely helpful and actually almost a better format, or we get more improved outcomes from it. I would say in this case, it was a little bit to our detriment in that the students weren't there. They didn't have the visible reminders of flyers and everything that we have all over campus here. There wasn't that incentive that we were planning to have, multiple things. And so we ended up not getting as many students as we had hoped, but I think we still had very rich data during those. We did record the sessions. We asked to have them to make sure that we could record them. We only did audio, so we didn't have to worry about faces and what's in the background and all of that type of thing.
I just want to interject so that Karen and Margaret know, we were able to get some additional funding from nursing to pay for the snacks, because that wasn't covered in our grant. So thanks to the nursing department for coming up with that.
And it wasn't the grant. So although we ended up not needing it because of Zoom. So it worked out, that part worked out. Whoops, I thought I changed slides. My mouse, I apologize. I'm wondering if my battery is starting to go out in it. Okay, so what did we end up with? Well, based on those original project goals that were on that first slide, we looked at what were the knowledge and attitudes towards palliative care. And essentially, the majority of the people responded that palliative care, they equated it with hospice or end of life care, when in fact, palliative care is a much broader category, end of life and hospice care being just a subcomponent of palliative care. And I can't remember if we went into the definition of palliative care, but it's really looking at any individual at any age who has a life-limiting disease. It doesn't have to be at that end of life. And it's really looking from a holistic perspective. It's extremely conducive to interprofessional education and practice. And in fact, it's very difficult to provide palliative care without it. And what brought this about was in part my passion for palliative care, Barb's passion for that. And then as we were talking among different professionals, we started saying, oh yeah, this person over here really works with a lot of head and neck cancer patients, and counseling, the whole psychosocial aspects of palliative care and everything. So it worked out wonderful. But mostly people didn't know what it was. And if they did, they tended to think it was hospice care, end of life. Most of those knowledge and attitudes were based around some type of personal experience of a family member or a friend. There were many questions surrounding ethics and communication among the disciplines, but we've kind of highlighted in orange what the pervading themes or topics were across disciplines and across sessions. And so as far as their interprofessional education concerns, what students were concerned about, I would say the one at the bottom there was probably the biggest one, time and scheduling. We have graduate students. They are all working professionally already. So for example, in nursing, they're all RNs getting a graduate degree. So they have jobs already. And that is same true of most of the other disciplines. And because of that, they're older, most have families, and they're already in a full-time curriculum. And now we're saying, okay, how could we do this too? And so time and scheduling was a huge concern. And then
a lot of the programs don't have any electives.
Right.
So we couldn't across the board say, well, if we offered it as an elective, because in the health disciplines, it's so tight.
Right. And so focusing on what really happens was another concern that they wanted us to be sure and address, that they didn't want hypothetical situations. If we did case studies or simulation, they wanted it based on a real world experience. And then the other question that we really worked on was how can we engage students because of these busy schedules and heavy curricular loads already. And I would say that main outcome there was really getting students from multiple health professions and programs and making it experiential. Involvement of the clinicians, and that kind of stems directly from this focus on what really happens. Most of us faculty in these professions are also clinicians and do some type of clinical work, either outside of our faculty work or as part of, but they wanted to make sure that we had practicing clinicians from each of those disciplines represented in those real world scenarios. And then finally, just to move us along, when we were looking at kind of the feasibility of what would this look like, extracurricular was one of the main themes, whether it's a continuing education type of offering. And then the other one that really came to light was a certificate program, to have some kind of a piece of paper. It's resume and CV building when they go out looking for jobs within their profession, to be able to show that they have attended this and they've accomplished this and received this education. And so that was another big takeaway there, that there needs to be, whether it's CEU, some kind of a certificate program, something that will help them in their next step of their career. And let's see, finally, what are our next steps? Well, we have an interprofessional team that we're working together on to basically figure out what are these next steps. And in doing that, really wanting to put together some type of a business plan where we're evaluating the costs, any revenue that might be generated, whether we go down the continuing education track or the certificate program. A little bit of a regional market analysis. We have that capability of doing that now. If we're to do the CE, how long would that be? We'd need to apply for the CEUs, which we do have an interprofessional CEU mechanism now, so that's wonderful. And then that would be probably more for the non-academic students, and then working through the I wrote down during our presentations today, work with Vanessa Bellum in theater and dance. Like, oh, she is on my list to email as soon as we're done here. Because I think some of those scenarios, because some of the topics they talked about that they wanted to have was, how do we have these difficult conversations? And how do we find out what really is quality of life for this person as opposed to that person who either does or does not want more treatment, because it doesn't mean that treatment has stopped necessarily, but having some of those difficult conversations and some role playing in a safe environment to be able to do that. And then also we had started a Moodle build out. Barbara actually had taken the lead on that, to make discipline specific content so that students, when we do have an interprofessional interaction, we could have discipline specific content that would prepare them for a case study or a real life scenario, so that they're coming in with some level of knowledge of that scenario and what their discipline would look at. And that way, when we all come together with many disciplines, we can take a look at some of the overlap and how one contributes to the other, and how answering, some of the nutritional aspects of hydration and feeding might have an impact on what maybe the medications are that pharmacology is dealing with, and that DNPs might be prescribing, et cetera, et cetera. So really looking at that, some potential funding opportunities. There are some, I'm starting to look at that so that that might get us started off on this. And then obviously to disseminate our findings. So we're toying with which direction is that next step, and I think a lot of that is going to really be based on what's financially feasible, because there's obviously a faculty workload that we're going to have to address within that. Anything, Barbara, that you would want to add to that?
No, I would just say we had really taken this, putting students in the driver's seat all the way to the end, in that initially we had a doctorate student who was going to do the analysis, so that it didn't have faculty's interpretations in it, but they graduated.
Yeah, with little problem there. So, and we definitely want to acknowledge Barb Mason Logan, who you met earlier, and Shauna Smith, because they're the other members of our IPE team that was part of this and really contributed a lot to it. Obviously, our grant funders, we thank you very much for this opportunity to really put this together and take a look at what would this look like? It's something that is so prevalent in all of our disciplines and what we do every day with our patients. And then also, I just wanted to thank our graduate student facilitators. Again, it was interdisciplinary, interprofessional. We had nursing, Bev from counseling, Joelle speech, Catherine pharmacy, and Andrea from nutrition and dietetics. So even in that case, we did have that interprofessional perspective, which was really nice because we always had at least 2 of them. So 2 disciplines represented at each of those focus groups. So thank you, and open for any questions.
Any questions or comments?
Is it cocktail time?
Well, Barbara, you've got me thinking that we should have a grant just for snacks. And that is a big part of getting students involved in building community in classrooms. So I'll think on that. I'll work on that. Yeah.
And that was in one of the focus groups, the question about like, what would motivate you to go? Food.
Mm-hmm. If it's student-centered work, usually it requires pizza. So yeah. We know this. So, well, thank you both so much. And thank you all to the grant recipients for your outstanding presentations today. I am absolutely inspired to all of your presentations, the creativity that you have and used when putting these together, the promotion of connection within your classrooms between students and faculty members, and then the focus, every single one of the presentations today was focused on professional development. And all of that goes back to being student-centered and really figuring out what we need to do in our classes to ensure that our students are getting having meaningful learning experiences, and then are able to go out into the field and be really, really successful. And I'm going to extend this on behalf of Margaret as well, but I would like to thank each one of our grant recipients for being so flexible. I know each one of you had challenges when it came to figuring out how you were going to implement these very hands-on, active activities with COVID, and it just shows, it's a great example of great teachers figure it out, and you all did such a great job of doing that. So let's give our grant recipients a round of applause. Really well done, and thanks for a fun afternoon of talking about teaching. I love that too. So thanks everybody else for coming and supporting our grant recipients and supporting teaching and supporting the program for instructional effectiveness. We hope to see you at other events. This has been recorded, so if you want to, I know not everybody could be here. It's a kind of a tough time at midterms, and so if any of your colleagues were interested in seeing your presentations and weren't able to make it, we'll have these posted on the PI website soon. So thank you.
Karen?
Yes.
Can I just say a couple things before we adjourn?
Of course, please.
You know, I'm altering your agenda and keeping everybody from their cocktail, but I just wanted to tell you all that this is by far absolutely the best meeting I've been to in about 6 months. So I'm so thankful to all of you and the really amazing work you're doing, and on behalf of students and also on behalf of your disciplines, and also in creating this community of scholars, which is the most important thing that we all do, even though some of the time now it feels like the most important thing we do is emergency management. So thank you for certainly reminding me why I'm here, and I hope you all have a really nice evening, and it's too bad we can't have a reception, but maybe next year we'll be able to do that. Have a great evening, and thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Laura. Have a good evening.